appears we are having some issues with the live stream, so Carl is actively working on this.
Shall we just wait a little longer, Joyce?
Sure thing. Someone playing Celine Dion. Love that.
It's like Dennis.
Okay, we are up and running and good to go. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Carl. So I'm going to call the joint committee to order, and I will ask for the roll to be called of the joint committee, please.
Milowski,
Present.
Benton, Bogart,
Present.
Boyd,
Present.
Brown,
Present.
Geist,
Present.
Long,
Present.
O'Connell,
Present.
Parker, Pisarcik,
Present.
Schwartzberg,
Present but recused.
Soltis,
Present.
Jablonski, Zarfos,
Present.
Zarnos.
We have a quorum?
We do.
Very good. Can we read the rules of the road? There are any today. Here we go.
So for community comments, any and all community members may provide their written comments through thoughts or questions regarding the projects presented to the committee for review and approval. Community members may also telephone their comments or questions to the committee administrator. All comments, thoughts, or questions must be submitted to the committee administrator no later than noon on October 5th. Submissions may be made via email to the following two addresses. Submissions may also be made by phone. Submissions made after the deadline will not be heard by the committee. Community members' thoughts, comments, or questions will be read into the record during the course of the meeting for committee consideration and applicant answering if they so wish. Phone submissions will be summarized by the administrator prior to submission into the record. The applicant of the project is under no obligation to answer any community questions. Due to the virtual nature of the meeting, this meeting will be conducted according to Robert's Rules of Order. Actions during the meeting will be taken by voice vote. Abstentions due to a conflict of interest should be stated for the record prior to the taking of any vote. No day of presentation submissions will be accepted. We also have additional guidance for the meeting format. The city will introduce the project and provide background information. The meeting will then be turned over to the applicant to proceed through the presentation. To facilitate a smooth presentation, the city asks that the committee not interrupt and to respect the time of all present. Committee comments will be made available or be facilitated following comments from the director. Once the presentation is concluded, the administrator will read any received public comments. The director will then provide comments about the process, progress, and support. The committee will then begin deliberations and project review, starting first with the warehouse district members, followed by the downtown flats. And we do ask that you use the raised hand function during this time. After deliberations and review concludes, the committee will render its recommendation to the Joint Commission. The chair will adjourn the meeting.
Very good.
So I did want to point out that there are two separate cases that will need to be made motions on today, one for landscape and one for site amenities. For reference, we do have the motion from the landscape streetscape for reference, and both the presenter and the director will be speaking to all of these points. The same with the following slide on site amenities. Next slide. And with that, we will turn it over to the Sherwin-Williams team for the presentation.
Does Director Hong want to make any comments prior to the presentation?
No, she will be making her comments following their presentation.
Okay, and with respect to the presentation, there is rather an extensive amount of material. The Joint Committee is familiar with it. I hope that you will concentrate on that which is different from what we saw the last time that you were here, rather than rendering an exhaustive review of the entire project. And also, we note that Jamie Schwarzberg has recused herself. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chair Bialowski. Yeah, we understand your comments. We'll run very quickly through the presentation, and we'll, as those items come up that kind of were tabled or under discussion, we will hit on those as we go through the presentation. Would please the next slide. So my name is Tim Buckley. I'm the Director of Corporate Real Estate for Sherwin-Williams. Presenting with me today is Julie Young, our Vice President of Communications, Andrew Albers from OJB Landscape Architecture, Jamie Schwarzberg from Daru Landscape Architecture, Matt Heisey from Vocon, and John Zegan from Osborne Engineering. As mentioned today, we're submitting for our landscape and site amenities. And I'd like to just run through real quick the previous approvals. On July 20th, we submitted our conceptual design that was approved with stated conditions. On September 14th, we submitted our schematic design to the Joint Commission. That was also approved in 3 separate motions. Some of them had stated conditions. Then in November 20th or November 30th, we submitted our final design, and that was approved with stated conditions as well. And then June 3rd, we came in to submit our signage, landscaping, lighting, and site amenities. The signage and lighting were both approved, and then landscaping and site amenities was tabled, and that's why we're back here today as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to walk us through the landscape, and particularly pay attention to the things that have changed.
Thanks, Tim. This is just the overview of the site plan, the different blocks, where we have service parking, buildings, and then the pavilion block closest to Public Square. Next slide. Landscape site plan, focusing our kind of most intense landscape around the pavilion facing Public Square and at the sort of West 3rd Street conjunction between the pavilion and the headquarters office tower. Next. I think you've all seen this before, but essentially the street tree plan, ginkgos highlighting all along the Frankfurt corridor. We chose those both because they give a really nice strong fall color when you kind of have a concentration of them, but also a narrow upright tree that let us get a full canopy tree in the sort of slightly narrower spaces along Frankfurt, both against the pavilion and between the garage and the tower building. And then honey locusts in line where there's already honey locusts filling out those rows. In between the buildings, the pavilion and tower block, we've got elm, and then a native, it's called a sour gum, which is a very nice parking lot tree. Doesn't have berries, doesn't have fruits, doesn't have nuts, gets good fall color, and will withstand the salt conditions in the parking lots. Next slide. Images of the trees. And then in the front of the pavilion, you'll note it'll come up again. We're selecting some specimen witch hazels for the front of the building. Otherwise, it's the trees you've seen. Next slide. This is the parking garage parcel. This is, you've seen this, we talked about, there was a large discussion about, on this block, we're kind of just keeping what's there. There's a really nice rows of mature trees that are essentially in the public right of way, but look like they're not, and we are keeping all those intact. And then inboard of the parking, adding tree islands wherever we can.
I point out where the fence has moved in this slide.
I don't think this one, the fence moved. This is the existing condition and we are just replicating it. In the next.
As we had mentioned earlier, we would really appreciate if the committee members did not interrupt the presentation and allow them to speak in full. Thank you.
Yeah, no, but to Jack's point, this one, the fence has moved. So this is the block, and the fence has moved here because we're not working so hard to preserve all those existing trees. So on this one, the fence has moved inside of the landscaping, and that was at the request of both the committee and planning. So the landscaping is outboard on the pedestrian side of the fence, rather than it being fence landscape, which is how the code states, it's how the code asks for it, but with everybody's agreement, we've swapped it so that the landscape is on the sidewalk side. And you'll notice the widened landscape areas that are internal to the parking lot as well. So we've got landscape on both sides of the fence for this. Next slide. This slide sort of focuses on the enhanced landscape around the tower and the pavilion parcel. This hasn't particularly changed. You've seen this before. The color garden that sort of starts with an ombre effect at the main entry to the pavilion and then proceeds kind of through the color scheme as it wraps around the buildings. The next slide. Close up on the color garden. And this also, the only change here, and you'll see it, there are some seating elements that were added at the main entry to the color garden. And Andrew will go through that stuff in a little bit more detail, what that furnishings are. And you'll see where the monument sign is that was approved in the last meeting, facing towards the corner of Public Square. Next slide. There was some question about color garden kind of over the seasons in the last meeting, and so this was actually a diagram we did for ourselves, but we've added it in to show you guys. This is on the right is what will be evergreen, so things that have color all year round, berries. There's an evergreen ground cover, and then kind of the difference between that and when it's in bloom on the left. Next slide. And this is the rendering of winter. So you'll see those specimen witch hazels blooming. Those bloom in February and March. And then the berries and evergreen shrubs kind of holding place in the perennial beds and back towards the building. And then this is, you've seen this before, but this is the progression of planting. So planting kind of arranged as it will go through the seasons to sort of show how that color ombre effect and the rainbow effect around the building is held throughout the season. So each season has its own kind of plant that holds that color as we go through. So this is organized from left to right, spring, summer, fall. Next slide. And at the bottom left, you can see the evergreens. This is working around the building. So we start with the dark purples at the front entrance to the pavilion and then wrap around into the kind of red, orange, yellow, green, blue hues. You saw this before. Next slide. Continuing the colors, and at the bottom right on this slide is the evergreens. Next slide. This is, again, a diagram sort of denoting around the outside edges how that color scheme progresses. And you'll notice that the dark green rings around the plants indicate evergreen, the red ring indicates evergreen. The dark blue ring indicates semi-evergreen. And then we've also noted where it's shrubs instead of perennials, because I think you do get some winter presence from the shrubs showing form and something that kind of casts shadows and gives some structure to the beds. Next slide. Again, moving around the rest of the building and along West 6th. Next slide. And this is in the color garden, the same scheme, sort of showing where is evergreen, where is semi-evergreen, and where we have shrubs so that there's at least structure in the beds. Next slide. And I think I can turn this over to Andrew to talk about the site materials and amenities.
Thank you, Jamie. And we'll touch on kind of sections through the streetscape and what's changed kind of at the end of this section of the presentation. Just touching briefly, we've discussed previously that the sidewalks are generally concrete, matching Cleveland city standards. Around the towers and at special entries, our special locations, we have a different material. So the red is indicating a colored concrete, and then the yellow is indicating unit pavers, which would be a similar in color to the colored concrete, and then the blue is indicating the Frankfurt paving, which we'll get into a little bit more detail in next slide. So next slide should show just some images of what those materials are. Across the top are concrete sidewalk, the enhanced colored concrete, which we're working sympathetic with the base material, excuse me, of the building, would be a dark gray. Unit pavers, this is a photo of the paver selection, which the photo tends a little bit more beige than the actual sample, which is a little bit more charcoal. And then the Frankfurt paving. On the lower left, you'll see the building materials that have been presented previously. This is from that presentation. The Frankfurt paving is intended to pick up on those materials. So we're using a matrix of 3 pavers, or proposing a matrix of 3 pavers in a herringbone pattern with a dark charcoal, a beige, and kind of a gray that would then pick up on the materiality of the building facade adjacent. If you go to the next slide, we have a plan showing the extent of that pavers. So in previous conversations, we talked about how do we demarcate the end of Frankfurt here to give some visual cue that this is not a through street. Adding the pavers, the intent is to make it appear more as a pedestrian zone and also give a visual cue to people on Frankfurt that they would not proceed down. Because what we've, as we talked about previously, Frankfurt is stopped and the pedestrian is given preference on West 3rd Street. So the sidewalk is continuous at the sidewalk elevation, and Frankfurt comes and is terminated there. At either end of that sidewalk on 3rd Street is a rollover curb condition. And if you go to the next slide, we'll see a view of that paving and the raised sidewalk there. And if you go to the next slide, this was the rollover curb condition. So on Frankfurt, we have concrete curbs. That concrete curb comes around and we have a standard rolled curb condition should a vehicle need to go over. And then on the 3rd Street side, those are granite curbs actually, and even though the graphic is showing that as concrete material, it is called out as a granite curb and would be a continuous granite curb down 3rd Street on that side. So if we go to the next slide, this is a view looking back at the extent of pavers and the garage and the wider sidewalk on the north side of Frankfurt, which we had previously discussed with the 4-inch caliper trees and the 7-foot clear trunk height. And then if we go to the next slide, this is that wider sidewalk with the trees where we're hoping that pedestrians will use the wider sidewalk on the north side. Next slide. Coming back onto 3rd Street in front of the tower, this is looking north with the tower on your left. And you can see the Rainbow Walk Garden that Jamie had talked about previously. On the left side, you have the 10-foot sidewalk, and then we have our 10-foot wide planting band. You'll notice that it's sloping up to your right. If we go to the next slide, the way that we're achieving that is so when you're in the tower and you're looking out, you are getting a little bit of that raised bed comes up, cuts off some of the view of the street maybe, but it also allows us to incorporate a landscape wall on the street side. And so this is a section showing the 10-foot wide sidewalk with the enhanced concrete at the tower, 10-foot 6 for the planting bed. And then on the north side here, we have 14-foot 2 for a concrete sidewalk that's out adjacent to the street. And if we go to the next slide, this is the detailed section of the proposed wall showing the bermed condition and the planting and the raked top on the wall. And if we go to the next slide, sorry if I'm going too fast, we can always come back. Just showing some elevations of the different characters of the wall. So from the street side, you've got the low wall, which would have a sandblasted finish to even out the concrete, with the planting kind of raised up beyond, and from the tower side looking out, the wall is hidden by the raised planting condition. If we go to the next slide, the red indicates where those proposed landscape walls are. This is also showing locations of bollards around the perimeters of the building that were a request from the security consultant. The bollards are a mix of 6-inch diameter bollards, which are outbound, and then a 9.25-inch bollard, which are really located only at the corners of the tower and then on the 3rd Street side of the pavilion building. If we go to the next slide, there's a few views of what those elements are. So again, the landscape walls in certain locations, we do have those walls without sort of the berm where they're adjacent to sidewalks. There are skate stops that will be incorporated. It's a little diagram of what that skate stop would be. Security bollards, we talked about being 9.25 inches. I believe they're M30 rated. They would be detailed in matte to match the 6-inch bollards, which we would see at the northeast corner of the pavilion and then along Superior. And that view is along Superior. Next slide. This is that view again. We had talked about kind of the condition along Superior. We are adding street trees along Superior. We've pulled those trees back from the face of Superior to avoid conflicts with existing utilities, existing street lights, the pedestrian lights, and also buses. So we get a nice row of trees, and we've incorporated the bollards kind of within that row to give one element and clear the lanes of traffic for pedestrians walking on either side. Next slide. This is a view northeast corner of Frankfurt, and again you can see the bollards closing off kind of the security elements, those landscape walls coming along. We've opened up the sidewalk closer to the pavilion so that in that pavilion building right there, that interior building function is exhibition, so that there's sort of an outward facing presence from Sherwin-Williams, and this allows the public to get up and view that, very similar to what's happening along Superior and why we brought the sidewalk up to the face of the building there. Next slide. One of our conversation pieces from our last presentation were opportunities for seating. It was noted that it would be really nice to be able to sit and enjoy the color garden, the planting design that has been proposed. So you see on the left that there are seating elements that have been introduced looking into the color garden there. And then we've also been working to incorporate additional seating elements at the existing bus shelters. The bus shelters have seating within them, but this offers an additional seating element just beyond. And what's been proposed are in yellow the leaning rails, and then at the color garden are what our seating rails. And so we'll see a photo of those if the next slide, but the next slides are showing kind of the plan disposition of those. So adding the rails adjacent to the bus stops, keeping them, we've proposed that they're in line with kind of the seating element inside the bus stop, and then giving at least 4 foot clear between those elements and the bus stop so people can circulate. Next slide. This is the other bus stop, which just has just one shelter, adding 2 leaning rails adjacent to that. And then the next slide. And then these are the elements that we've proposed, which are leaning rails and seating rails. Essentially, they operate by offering someone a place to kind of stop and rest and lean against them. It's a little different than a bench at the bus stop, so you're kind of more in an upright position waiting for the bus. And then at the seating rails at the color garden, it's a more of like a bench condition. The next slide. This is a updated or a enlarged plan showing the location of the seating rails, and a more zoomed in. You can kind of see their relationship with the color garden, looking into that color garden. On the north side, you'll see the location of the flagpoles. So the flagpoles are located within that gravel band on the north side right there. Next slide. And then our street furniture diagram, which shows these elements. We are proposing some additional litter receptacles, which are the A, which is highlighted yellow. And those are located around the site. There are existing litter receptacles that are city litter receptacles that are associated with the bus stops. Those we're proposing to remain. The bike racks, we have expanded the bike rack program. That's the cyan letter C. There's a summary of the additional our bike rack requirements versus what's being provided. We've located, if we start on the tower block, we have located bike racks on kind of the north and south. So at vacated Frankfurt, those bike racks are located there because they're immediately adjacent to the service dock entry, and so anticipated that bicycle messengers, people coming to make deliveries, would be able to park their bikes there and have immediate access to where they're going. On the south side there are 10 bicycle spaces. Those are located adjacent to the accessible spaces, and then that gives you proximity to the southern entry of the tower, the superior side entry to the tower. There's also spaces that are on the vacated Frankfurt, and those give you more direct access to the entry to the tower at the kind of northeast side. In addition, we've added bicycle spaces at the pavilion, kind of in line with the street trees there on West Road. We did note that there are 24 bicycle spaces that are within the garage that would be primarily used by bicycle commuters who are coming to Sherwin's office. And then you'll see in the diagram where the parking lot fence is located. We have pulled the parking lot. So on the garage block, that existing fence is inbound of that planting. We are putting that fence back inbound of that planting. On the tower block, as Jamie noted, a little bit different than the code requirement. We have pulled that fence inbound of the screening planting so that the planting would be outbound, giving a little bit more garden feel to the sidewalk and streetscape experience in those locations. So and then I guess the proposed flagpoles. These are the elements that are being proposed. The downtown bike rack by D-Row is an inverted U bicycle rack, so the preferred type of bicycle rack for bicyclists, giving you 2 points of contact for your bike. We understand that this is a preferred vendor for City of Cleveland, but I think what's important is the inverted U shape. The lakeside litter with side opening, we've talked with planning about this, and then this was kind of where we arrived with the preferred litter receptacle. And then commercial flagpole, which is on Sherwin's property, which would be a 35-foot tall flagpole with internal halyard located as shown on the plan. And then the next slide, talking with the committee and planning, the selected or the proposed fence is the Ameristar Aegis, which I believe was what we arrived at through conversations with planning. Next slide. And then the last series of slides are streetscape sections with a plan here showing the elements. We'll kind of go around quickly. This is at Frankfurt with the pavers located between the tower and garage. Those are the 4-inch caliper street trees that have been added, maintaining a 7-foot clear trunk height. There's ornamental planting at the base of those. And you can see that on the north side, which would be the left in the plan, 16'9" kind of total sidewalk width to the curb, and then how those kind of lanes work around the trees. And then on the right-hand side, the planting bed and the continuous sidewalk there. The next slide, a little bit further down Frankfurt at the parking lot, there's the evergreen screening. The streetscape continues in the same manner, but here you're out beyond the garage, and you can see that the parking lot is adjacent a little bit further down. The next slide. So this is on 6th Street. This was a element of conversation last time. We are, in addition to the existing street trees on 6th Street, we are continuing new street trees for the entire length of this block. We have the 7-foot band where the street trees are, 12'6" sidewalk through this area. The planting bed for the evergreen screening is 5 foot. We've located the fence, as we've discussed, on the back side of that. And then we have a 9-foot additional buffer between the parking lot and the pedestrian realm. And in that zone, we are proposing a second row of street trees that would then kind of create a double row of trees for the pedestrian environment there. And sort of summary on the right-hand side. Next slide. As you turn the corner on Superior, Superior's geometry does vary. So here we have about a 17-foot sidewalk that increases in the next section you'll see as the road kind of geometry works. But again, we've got the 5-foot planting bed. We've got the fence located on the parking lot side. There's an additional 2-foot sort of buffer. We have added the street trees in that zone. You can see this is at the bus stop, and the leaning rail is located in that zone, leaving you a nice, generous sidewalk area. But again, pulling the street trees back in order to avoid conflicts with pedestrian lighting, street lighting, and then the buses. Next slide. This is the streetscape immediately in front of the tower. You can see that the section has gotten wider, but we are pulling the street trees back in kind of the middle of that zone. So we've got 8-foot sidewalk out by the street. The zone for the street trees and the bollards are in line with those, and then I'm leaving 10 foot of sidewalk on the tower side. And again, the program of the tower right there is exhibition space, then outward facing view from within the interior of the building. So it gives pedestrians and the public an opportunity to come right up to the face of the building and engage with those displays. Next slide. This is sort of north of the garage block on 6th Street. We are working to preserve those existing trees. The fence, the parking lot fence again, is going in on the back side of those existing planters. We're replanting the evergreen planting where possible, or adding to it where possible, avoiding the root balls of those existing trees. But within the parking lot, you can see in the plan, we've added widened parking lot islands to add a second row of trees, so that this row of trees becomes a double row of trees in this area with the addition of new trees in that sort of second row configuration. But the sort of width of the sidewalk and then the planting strip are really working with the existing conditions. Next slide. And then coming around on Superior, we're continuing with the parking lot geometry changes a little bit, but we are maintaining those widened islands in order to get a little bit of green and more green into the parking lot, and then also adding that second row of trees. So here on Sinclair, you'll have there's actually street trees that are out by the street. There's the trees that are in line with the parking lot, and then we're adding a third row of trees that are kind of marching along behind that. Next slide. And then this is in front of the garage, adding street trees on West 3rd, 17-foot sidewalk, and then 6-foot zone for those trees. Next slide. And I think that is the conclusion of the slides. And then this is a view of that color garden that Jamie had presented. This is the same view, but Jamie had a much nicer depiction of what this might look like in the winter. And then the last two slides are the kind of an appendix, which are just the required planting summaries.
Did receive 2 public comments about the project. The first one shown here is asking for clarification on the leading rails and their location, as well as the intent of the landscape wall. The second comment is from RTA. On the next slide, please. Who is asking that the vote to finalize anything in the public right of way be held off at this time due to necessary coordination with the final location of the bus shelters.
Thank you, Allison. I'll go ahead and share some comments on behalf of the planning department. First of all, I want to thank the presenters for their presentations and then also responsiveness to the requests of the committee from the prior meeting. Since the last design review meeting, which was on June 2nd earlier this year, our staff team has met 3 times at least with the Sherwin-Williams team, including in June, August, and September. There were also multiple discussions by email and phone in between related to this presentation. So the city, we have made clear our greatest priorities, including the conditions that were stated in the some of the conditions that were stated in the last design review meeting. We focused primarily on site amenities for the public, such as benches and seating, the treatment of Frankfurt, and the experience of West 6th Street. I'm happy to dive into the process of each of those should there be any further questions. We want to express that we've come to a consensus through our discussions, understanding the various concerns and the realistic needs of Sherwin-Williams. We've come to this consensus through our discussions about the broader priorities, and we're supportive of the project advancing through final approval. And we're looking forward to the discussion today regarding the design. Thank you.
Where are we, Allison?
So at this time, we wanted to open up the discussion for the many members of the warehouse district. And we would appreciate if people could use their raised hand function.
Excuse me, this is Dennis. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes.
Okay. It's just a couple of thoughts on West 6th and along St. Clair. You know, where you it looks like you would have room for some more seating rails or sitting rails. And I just wonder, I'm sure you discussed that, and I just wondered how you came to a conclusion that you would not include those on those two streets.
Yeah, I can speak to that. You know, this was a lot, we had a lot of discussion about both the seating rails and the sitting rails. We talked a lot back and forth with the city. We tried to focus the leading rails on the areas where they're definitely needed for the RTA stops for overflow. With regards to the sitting rails that were actually on our on our private property, those were the locations that we felt comfortable and we know that we could watch and we could monitor. So at this point, we elected to say, we're not comfortable with that yet on the West Third side and the St. Clair side at this, or I'm sorry, the West Sixth side at this time. But I mean, where we place them is where Sherwin has a good comfort level.
And then with regard to the second row of trees, you've widened the area from the street to the parking lot. I'm just wondering how that will play out when there is in the future development on those sites. Do you envision that setback to be continued, or would that then change because of what might be proposed and built on those parking lots?
That's really a tough one, just because we don't know what's going to be built there. I mean, obviously, we're going to have a huge influence on what goes on that in the future development area. I know Sherman's very interested in making sure we understand what that looks like and what that feels like. So I can't guarantee anything for sure at this point, but I know it's in our interest to want to make sure that's consistent with the rest of the West Third or West Sixth side.
I think it's important to point out, though, that, the city ordinance does require buildings to be placed on the property line, which in this diagram would be at the edge of that existing sidewalk. So technically, by zoning, that a building or new buildings would be placed in that zone of landscaping and street trees.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Alan?
Hi. One thing, just since you mentioned it, the ordinance requires buildings be placed at the property line. I know we're not talking about the pavilion, but what happened with the pavilion since it's not on the property line? Is there a variance there?
Yes, I mean, we went through the variance process. We had to get approved setbacks on the tower parcel and on the garage parcel.
Okay. The other thing, the seating elements that you mentioned look more like leaning elements, and I know why there are no benches provided near the bus stops, but I would strongly encourage you guys to reconsider that. It's kind of gross that you have seating elements closer to the building, and then people who are waiting for the bus will have to lean on something. I don't think that looks good for you guys. The other thing I wanted to ask is we had spoken about the corners of the parking lot at West Sixth, at Frankfurt, and also at Superior. You sort of had this space that's maybe 15 foot by 15 foot that we had discussed, maybe asking you guys to look at that space to see if some sort of public amenity could be provided there, maybe a small seating area or a little garden of sorts. I was just wondering if that was considered, or if you have any comments on why that wasn't included.
So we did consider that, and we thought a compromise that was acceptable to Sherwin was to pull that fence line back and actually add that landscaping. So probably not exactly what you were looking for, but I mean, it's something that we felt comfortable with. I think it is a good improvement to the site. And just to respond to your earlier comment, we've had numerous meetings with RTA already. We've had at least 3 meetings. we really want to find a bigger solution to all of the bus stops. And, we've also been working with DCA to find out, I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, I think we have an issue that shoulders are too small. There's a bigger solution, I think, that can come about. But it's also a complicated solution because it doesn't just involve our property. It involves all the stops in kind of this whole downtown area. So we are engaged in discussions actively with RTA about what is the right thing to do for all of the downtown residents.
And I think technically, Tim, it's important to note that it is technically not our property. So those continued conversations are collaborative between RTA, the city, and with Sherwin-Williams being an active participant in.
Other comments from that committee?
I have a couple more. I noticed that there were street lights or lighting elements detailed along Frankfurt. I didn't notice any lighting elements along the other streets.
Lighting was approved in our last submission.
Okay. Okay, just want to make sure. And then the other thing is the little space between the garage and the existing building. Here on this plan, it would be near where it says like F, one of the Fs. Is there more detail in that? Like what is going to exist in that space? Are there trees, or is there landscaping, or are there electrical equipment or anything like that that's going to be unsightly?
I mean, I think we had planned that, and, I'll let Andrew speak to it as well. I think that was going to be a grass area just at this time because we don't know exactly what's going to be there. I know that the former, the Gilman building needs an area for a dumpster, and obviously if a dumpster, I think that one area looks like it's set up for a dumpster pad, that would be enclosed per the city requirements.
In that zone, there's an existing tree in front of that gap. The required screening along the sidewalk is included. So the evergreen screening, and then the new fence behind that is just like Tim mentioned, with the sort of unknown of how this property would be developed. There's grass areas, and then there's screening for the Gilman building dumpster. But otherwise, it's kind of consistent with the landscape for this block for the parking lot.
Mark Benton has his hand raised.
I've got kind of a functional question about these seat and bench rails. They appear to be a dark colored metal, and I would think in the summer when they get hot, nobody's going to want to touch them, much less sit on them. And in the winter, I don't know that that would be very comfortable either. Did you consider some sort of wood treatment or some other thing other than just metal?
Yeah, so this is a product by Landscape Forms, and I don't think the image really shows it great, but there is actually a little bit of a wood inlay. You can kind of see the edge there. So the element that you would actually be leaning against changes material from a metal to a wood. So that it does take into consideration, so that it's not just like a metal bar that you're either freezing or burning against. A nice wood surface there.
And it's sloped so it's not going to be wet.
Right.
Other comments from this committee? Are we ready to switch, Allison?
Yes, I don't see anyone else's hands raised.
Okay, let's start with downtown flats, and actually first like to call on Tom Zarfos to comment on the planting if he has any comments.
I think they've done a nice job on the planting. I support what they've done. I think they've made a big effort. I have some other issues, but not on the planting.
And I presume that the city arborist has been engaged in these discussions, not only in terms of the selection of plant material, but also the size of the tree pits. Is that correct?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, this is Jennifer. That was going to be my question. Yeah, this is, I have not had the opportunity to review the design prior to today. I did see the width of the tree pits kind of varies from 4 feet up to, I think, 6 foot 9 inches, but I just didn't see any length measurements there. That was one of the things I was curious about.
They look like they are actually long for the most part, but can you answer that, Andrew or Jamie?
So they do vary in length around the site. The ones here on this section on the left, that 6'9" is kind of a square. On the right-hand side, that 6'9" is more like 12 feet. But they do vary around. The sort of minimal length dimension would be 8 foot long. I think our smallest tree pit is probably 4 foot by 8 foot, but I don't have that dimension clearly in my head because they vary all around.
Is there any irrigation in any of these tree pits?
We are proposing irrigation for all of the landscape areas, and so there will be irrigation for all of the landscape areas, including all the trees.
Tree pits.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
It's actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to disagree. So I'm not a fan of irrigation in tree pits. Those are right-of-way trees, presumably, right? And cutouts that urban forestry will ultimately be tasked with maintaining. And so when those trees die, then those irrigation lines get damaged when we go to dig out those trees and grind the stumps and plant new trees. So I would prefer to find another method or means of watering them to help them get established for the first year. And it would probably be a lot more cost effective to do, maybe gator bags or something in lieu of installing all these irrigation lines. What are your thoughts?
I don't see any issue with that. We will work with you to get that get the irrigation incorporated in the right of way per your preference.
Jennifer, are you satisfied with the lengths of these tree pits? Will these trees survive?
The length of the tree pits are better than we see in most downtown, cutouts. So I think the average of 8 feet is good. The smallest tree pit size, correct me if I'm wrong, you said was 4 by 8. So the tree pit size is going to determine the mature size of the tree, right? It's how much soil volume do you fit in there? That is what dictates the size of the tree canopy, regardless of what it's genetically capable of. So yeah, I think you could get a decent sized tree that's gonna, provide, mild shade, for lack of a better word, like around a bus stop for a pedestrian or two. Will it be like major shade trees? No, it's not good. It's not going to happen. But I think you have way more soil volume on the private side with your, super impressive, beautiful, display on the corner there. You're definitely going to have enough soil to grow mature shade trees there.
You want to see them do something differently?
Sorry, I was on a call and I don't remember on that corner what species were proposed. But I do like that question.
If you go to slide 9, there should be a diagram of the tree species. For the most part, along the in the public realm, we're continuing and trying to work with following kind of the cues given from existing trees. So where there's existing elm locus, we're filling in. On Frankfurt, we talked about a ginkgo just on Frankfurt, kind of running down. Go back a couple more slides. Keep going. These were the photos, but I go back and then this is the slide, the tree species diagram.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, that was one of the. So I did make a note of. So it looks like you're gonna put the Liriodendron on the private side or just non-right of way. Is that correct? Well, and the Nissa, which you're proposing in the parking lot, is obviously not right of way. So is that accurate?
Yeah, the tulip poplar is on the pavilion building. We do have two of them located kind of on 3rd Street. They're pulled back from the face of the street a little bit, but they're all kind of within this band of landscape that are planting that's inbound of the right of way.
And I'm not familiar with Little Volunteer, but the name would suggest that it's much smaller than its, parent plant, if you will, than the original species. Do you know how tall it gets?
Jamie could address that.
Yeah, it's got that same upright form of the tulip poplars, but I think they only get 25 feet tall. And we just had it there because we had a tight spot where the pullout is and the sidewalk narrows. And we didn't want to get we didn't want to try to get the elms in there and continuing the row of elms, but we didn't want to leave it with no tree in there. If you have concerns about that, we could remove them or switch them out with something.
I don't know that it's a concern as much as, just really trying to maximize canopy downtown, right? There's we all know how hot it is downtown. And so wherever we can grow a shade tree downtown, we're doing the right thing. We're not going to have any shade trees on this plan in any of the right-of-way locations. Like I said, just based on soil volume, which is the #1 limiting factor. Certainly salt is a factor, drought, everything. But on this, where the Liriodendron is on the plan, on the bottom right there, it looks like there might be an opportunity based again, just on soil volume, that you've got a bigger planting area. So you could put potentially a bigger tree species there.
Would you prefer that to be the straight species instead of the dwarf?
If there's enough room, yeah, it's hard to tell just on this diagram.
I think the the ones along the 3rd Street, those ones, it has to stay something small, but in the maybe wrapping around the pavilion, those where there's more soil volume.
In an effort to,
shade trees.
I want to suggest that that there should be a meeting, and I feel a sense of collaboration here, so I'm not worried about it. That Jennifer should have a chance to talk to Andrew and Jamie offline, and I'm sure they'll come to satisfactory conclusion to that. So I'd like to move on. I see that Director Hong's hand is raised. I'd like to call on her.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment first to Jennifer. I apologize. I thought there had been prior coordination through our landscape architect at Capital Projects with you. So thank you for coming today and joining the discussion. I also wanted to mention that Frankfurt is vacated, so that would not be the responsibility of the city, but rather the responsibility of Sherwin for that particular segment. So that care would fall on the property owner.
Very good. Thank you for reminding us that. And
Thank you,
let's go back to Tom Zarfos.
Yes, thanks, Jack. The size of the tree pits are important, but equally important, if not more important, is what they're putting in there besides the tree ball. And I would hope that they would give Jennifer some real detailed information about the backfill material. I mean, these are all highly disturbed urban sites. So the trees need more than just 4x8. They need a proper backfill. And respectfully, I disagree a little bit with Jennifer about irrigation. I think some of these tree pits have more than just the trees in them. So if there's no irrigation there, that's going to put a big maintenance load on somebody. I would rather have the irrigation and make sure the trees live and not have the problem of having to remove dead trees.
Let's let these guys sort this out. I know that Sherwin-Williams does not want dead trees on, on their property or adjacent to them either. So I'm sure they'll come to a correct conclusion about that. I'm asking for other comments from the committee, and while we're waiting for raised hands, I'll raise a few of my own. I know, and first of all, I also want to commend the team and Sherwin-Williams for their patience, and also just express again how glad I am that they're going to be here. They obviously had a lot of other choices, so we thank you for that. And I know that this sometimes feels like the last chance for us to, advocate for the public who's going to be, walking through here and experiencing this. And the planting plan, I think, is from what I can see, is pretty fabulous. So thank you for that. I want to ask a couple of questions related to site amenities and various features. And I know that the discussion about the corner lots, those potential pocket parks, was one that the city and Sherwin-Williams went back and forth on a number of times. And Sherwin has moved the fence line so that the path along West Sixth, which is primarily a path at this point. It's not really a place for people to dwell on this side of the street because there's no reason for that. So I understand the concern about being able to control, security issues, concern about people camping out on the benches, and I think you've come up with a reasonable compromise in the leaning rails and the seating rails. I do wish that there were more of those, but I want to ask, how do people walk into the buildings from the parking lots? Where do they go? And the reason I'm asking is when I'm looking at the number of litter receptacles there are, I wonder whether there shouldn't be a few more. I know when I come to my building in the morning, I often have a coffee cup that I need to get rid of. And I'd love to be able to do that on my way in rather than having to carry it into the building. So I wonder if it wouldn't be good if there was at least something more on Frankfurt for people walking through the site. And also at the pathways where people are walking to get into the building. Andrew?
Well, our anticipation was that at the tower block, you are parking there, and then you would come along the Superior side and enter through the lobby from Superior at the big entrance there. And so we have at the bicycle parking, there's a litter receptacle there. From the Frankfurt lot, I think just kind of in conversations with Tim, we had kind of limited some of the parking or the litter receptacles and tried to locate them strategically. So I guess, Tim, did you have any comments on the number of litter receptacles and where they were located?
Yeah, not really opposed to doing some additional, this is what our thought was. You know, a lot of our employees will be parking in the garage. They'll actually be taking the walk, the Sky Bridge across to the tower. So anyone parking in the garage, we can handle that internally. The lot to the west of the tower off of West 6th, that will be primarily a visitor and contractor parking. We're going to direct our visitors, as Andrew said, down to the Superior side, along Superior over to the pavilion, and that will be the main pathway, and that's why we put a trash receptacle right there along Superior, and then a lot of our other people who will be coming from using public transportation will probably be coming across to across over to the pavilion and either coming in that way or going to the tower. Now, internally, we have trash receptacles that we're planning right inside the tower lobby. So as employees come in, if they do have something, we'll have those inside. Again, not opposed to adding additional outside ones. More worried about, just want to make sure that we're servicing those on a regular basis, making sure that we're not attracting additional birds and things that we don't really want near the building, the building glass. So
I understand.
but as far as if you think that an additional one down Frankfurt, that's not something that we would absolutely consider.
I think that would be a good idea. Also, I noticed that the top of these receptacles is flat, and it concerns me that people sometimes just leave their trash on top of them as opposed to putting them inside. And I don't know whether that is a concern for you or not, Tim.
So we went back and forth actually a lot on that, and I actually pulled in our security group as well. Our security group, they actually preferred the side entry ones, and we also did run this by our avian consultant. Also thought that the side entry would be preferred. I agree with you that a lot of people will just set things on top, and I think that's just going to be an ongoing maintenance item for sure. When
You just have to police it, right?
Yep.
What about smoking? You have a lot of employees in this building, and I'm sure you don't encourage smoking, but have you anticipated that there will be some smokers, and where will they go, and what will happen to their butts?
Yeah, that's always a difficult one. We struggle with that one here today. I mean, we don't provide a smoking area at our current building. People who smoke will go outside, and I can't remember what the regulation is, but they got to stay so far away from the front door. That's kind of what we're anticipating. Again, we can look and adjust and see where people will tend to congregate, and then try to address that. I don't know that as an organization, I don't know that we're at this point willing to designate a specific area for them.
I understand that, and I understand why, and it might change based on prevailing winds and where they feel protected. The concern is the additional work you're creating for your people to have to sweep up after this if you're not providing any receptacles or any provision for those to be discarded appropriately. So
I know it's going to be a maintenance issue, but I think after we maybe see, people will just naturally go where they want to go, and maybe we can adjust and see where that ends up being and address it. What comes. That's kind of how we've handled it here at the building now.
Relative to the future development, are the garages, so some amount of parking which is taking place here is parking that you need obviously now, but when those sites, when the northern site becomes available for development, I presume that the southern site will be reserved for Sherwin-Williams in any event, and that parking would be replaced in a garage. Is it your thought that the rest of that parking would also be replaced in a new garage? as opposed to, does the existing garage accommodate future floors at some point? Is it sized for that?
Well, I'm sorry, well, within our tower,
The question is when these parking lots are developed potentially in the future, where will that parking be relocated to? Will it go on top of the existing garage, or will it go in a new garage on the southern site?
it would go in the new garage on the southern site. It's assuming that we need, it's kind of hard to tell because, you know, again, people are pushing towards public transportation, so we may not need to add a whole lot. But, you know, right now, we feel that, you know, we have 900 some spots in our current garage. And we think that that's going to be adequate for the majority of our employees who drive to work.
For now, and we don't know
Correct.
what the situation will be 10 years from now or later on, but
Correct. So if we build on the south parking lot, we would create parking, you know, add additional parking underneath whatever we would build there.
I understand. Relative to the situation with RTA, I'm wondering what the best way to craft an approval today. They've asked us not to approve what's going in the public realm. And I actually direct this question to Director Hong, whether she has thoughts about how to deal with trying to manage, you know, what to do relative to that portion of the submittal.
Thanks for the question. Could you restate that? I'm sorry, Jack.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, we've been requested by RTA not to approve the portion
Right.
of this in the public realm. And I know that Sherwin-Williams has worked hard to accommodate what they understand at present about what those needs are, but how should we deal with this given that request from RTA?
Yes, thanks, Jack. So where we stand at the city is, you know, should the committee agree that the proposed treatment, so the lean bars themselves from a design perspective, you know, if you like those, if you could approve the look and of that particular item, we will take on the further discussion with RTA, with Sherwin on the exact placement and the final location of the shelters. You know, we will have to continue discussing with RTA about their preferences related to transit waiting amenities. So hopefully that was clear. The question to you today
Yeah.
is, can you sign off on them, and we'll work out the details.
I understand. So if they might be expanded, they might be shifted a little, but is the treatment appropriate is the question. Okay,
That's right.
thank you. Greg Soltis, I see your hand raised.
Hi, Jack. Thank you. I did want to say that I think, you know, the planting plan is really, you know, well done and well thought through. And I always learn something from you, Jamie, when I listen to you give presentations. I took notes. I did have just a couple questions about the plaza space. And I know, you know, just from the design, the intention of the plaza is not necessarily for people to hang out in it. Although we had the discussion about creating some seating so that people can enjoy the landscape. And I mean, in general, you know, you'd want like 1 linear square foot for about every 30 square feet of space in a plaza. And you'd want to vary that seating so that you have at least 10% with backs for older people. And I understand also the desire to not have, you know, homeless people or people who sleeping in the plaza. And I think that's a valid concern. So I understand why you chose the more leaning type seats and benches. But I'm wondering, and Andrew, can you go to like where you have an image of those seats that are intended for looking at the. So I'm wondering if those, and it doesn't show, do you have a plan view of how they're situated on the plan?
There is an enlarged plan that is further, I think next one, maybe. Keep going. Let's see. Actually, it's the one, there should be a enlarged plan right after the image of the materials, of the leaning rails. There it is. Sorry.
Yeah,
One
so
before.
okay, so I was wondering if, and it shows it more on the top one a little bit, but on the bottom one, if maybe, those immediate environments can be designed to be a little bit more cozy for people that would be there by maybe setting them back a little bit so people's feet wouldn't be in the pedestrian through zone, and their feet could actually be on the cement in an area that's designed just for those benches, and maybe some sort of softening of the area around the bench so people feel a little bit of a sense of enclosure and feel more comfortable, to watch people walking by and to look at the gardens and don't feel so exposed. Those would just be my recommendations for those seating areas, and potentially maybe even calculating if maybe another bench or two maybe situated somewhere differently, or maybe even within the garden might be nice, considering whatever the square footage of this immediate area where the special garden is, maybe the calculations for the amount of seating could be made within this square footage, not necessarily the whole square footage if this is just the place intended for people to sit. And I don't know if they make leaning benches with backs on them for older people, but that's a consideration as well. Thank you.
Something to think about, Tim. Obviously this is a difficult subject to deal with, but you might consider that this particular spot is so public, under such scrutiny, that maybe it's not a spot that people who are wanting to hang out would actually choose to, the wrong type of visitor that you are trying to discourage. There's going to be so much activity coming by here that maybe this is a place where you could afford to be a little more generous in terms of allowing them to dwell here. And I just wonder what is actually happening, across the street in our public square now. Are there people camping out in a way that is, um, you know, would be detrimental to, or that people might feel threatening? Because the reason I'm asking that is, isn't that where someone who really is looking to take a nap is more likely to go than in this spot where everybody's coming in and out of this building and walking by here all the time?
Jack, I think it's hard to say. This block right now is so blank that it does attract that kind of use. And it's just it's going to change so drastically once it's developed. But
Well, they're not going to be there when the
still going to have
construction
to,
is going
those
on.
people still exist. They still need to exist in some location. So it does have, it certainly is. I mean, I've run into it on site visits. So that's, I know it's there. The concern is valid. I think Sherwin's in a little bit of a wait and see situation to really see whether it moves elsewhere. I mean, or whether it's still a concern for their employees feeling safe coming in and out of the pavilion building and their visitors. I think they just don't know.
I think you said that well, Jamie. I mean, this is a level that I don't disagree with you, Jack. I mean, this is a level that we felt comfortable with at this time. If we don't sense a problem and we can add additional, we would be all for it. I mean, we're spending a lot of money to put some really beautiful landscaping in there, and we want people to come in and enjoy it. At the same time, we've got to make sure that we keep a place that's safe and secure for our employees and visitors. So this is a level that we felt comfortable with, but would down the road, if there's not a problem, why wouldn't we want to add more?
Well, the reason you wouldn't is because it's done, and why go back and fix something that that ain't broke. It seems like it's now or never, Tim, to me, and
Well, I mean, I don't know that we're really required to put any seating out here. I
you're
mean,
not, you're not required. You're just being requested to.
Yeah. I understand. I think this is where we're comfortable on the request at this point.
Okay, asked and answered. Jeff Bogart, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. I'm not going to belabor the point, but I'm going to add to what Jack and Greg said. I think you should reconsider some seating. I don't know if you have another space in this complex for your employees to go and eat. I know if I worked in this building, I'd want to sit out front and eat a lunch now and then, or just enjoy the space. And I'm a little older, so leaning on that leaning bar to me would be good for about 2 minutes, and then I'd not want to be there. So I really think you should consider a few benches there that people could sit on. I think you've done a marvelous job on the design of this. You've taken a lot of consideration of other entities and interested parties throughout this whole project. I think you've done a marvelous job on the streetscape and landscape design here. Just the seating, to me, seems to not be a public relations winner in that you're saying, you've got this great complex, come look at it, but don't dwell here.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there other comments from the committee?
Can I say one more thing, Jack?
Of course, Greg.
I think the suggestions I made are kind of middle ground sort of solutions that, that don't, that create little cozier spaces to be, but don't necessarily create places where, people will sleep. And I do understand Sherwin-Williams's concerns. I've taken my class down to Public Square recently, and it's not an ideal situation right now. And that falls upon the people who are responsible for maintaining the cleanliness and uh, enforcing behavioral type rules in Public Square. And I wish that concern would be taken care of in Public Square by Downtown Cleveland Alliance or whoever else is responsible for those spaces. But I do think a little tweaking here could make it a little bit cozier and still be in that safe middle ground.
Greg, and we'd have to get into a little bit more about what you mean 100% by that. But I mean, that doesn't sound, I think that would be obviously something we'd entertain. I mean, the fact if we can make this, these do have to get mounted on some type of concrete, the way the rails are. So if we can put a little bit of a landscaping around those to make it cozier, we would be supportive of doing that.
Yeah, appreciate that. And
Greg, this drawing is really a diagram, at this scale.
Right.
To actually understand what's happening with that, I think is a little bit deceptive too.
Okay, yeah. And a lot of times in park spaces, you'll see like if, there's a little different type of paving or an extension of the paving that kind of pops into the green space as a rectangle, and then the bench is set back and leaves a little bit of room for the feet, and then you can put a nice like greenery around it, and it creates almost like a little seating alcove that is more comfortable for people to inhabit.
I think I have a good sense of what you're suggesting, Greg. I think it's a good suggestion.
Thank you, Jamie. I don't see any other hands raised.
Krista does have. Yes,
Krista.
Krista
Oh,
has
thank you.
her-
Okay. Krista, we'll call on you.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo that I agree with my colleagues regarding the benches and the seating, both in this area outside the pavilion and near the bus stops. So I encourage a little bit more consideration working with staff and RTA on those. And also I want to commend the landscape designers. I think this is very well thought out. It shows. I like the gradation of colors. That's a level of detail you don't often see. I realize that's very specific to this project, and I think it's well done. And that's all my comments.
Thank you, Krista. Jeff, is your hand still raised?
Yes. Are we ready for a motion?
I want to ask Allison how she wants to handle this. I think, are these You want two separate motions, one for landscape, one for amenity. And will we vote as a joint committee? Or
Yes, so
separate committees?
there
Joint
are-
committee?
there are two motions, one for landscape, and we could go back to the motion forms in terms of the guidance that you had provided last time on the earlier slides. And you will be voting as a joint committee on both of the motions.
Okay, I see Director Hong.
Yeah, and if I may, procedurally, both were tabled, so we will need motions to take both of the prior motions off the table.
Okay, so let's start with that. Two separate motions, if someone could make them to bring them back before the committee to untable the landscape motion. Let's start with that.
This is Jeff Bogart. I'll make the motion to untable the landscape issue.
Is there a second?
This is Krista, I second.
Thank you, Chris. Is any further questions or comments about untabling? Hearing none, would you please take the roll?
Milowski,
Yes.
Benton,
Yes.
Bogart,
Yes.
Boyd,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Geist,
Yes.
Long,
You're muted, Dennis.
Yes.
O'Connell,
Yes.
Sarchik,
Yes.
Soltis,
Yes.
Blonsky, Zarfas.
You're muted, Tom.
Yes.
The motion carries. I would entertain a motion to untable the site amenity issue.
This is Jeff Bogart, and I'll make the motion to untable the site amenities issue.
Is there a second?
Seconded. Pisarcik.
Thank you, Krista. Are there any further questions or comments? Hearing none, I would ask you to call the roll, please.
Milowski,
Yes.
Benton,
Yes.
Bogart,
Yes.
Boyd,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Geist,
Yes.
Long,
Yes.
O'Connell,
Yes.
Sarchik,
Yes.
Soltis,
Yes.
Zarfas.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Now, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the landscape streetscape with the condition that there be a follow-up consultation with the city arborist and that the portion of the right-of-way which deals with RTA shelters be left to administrative review at such time as RTA and Sherwin-Williams come to an agreement, but approving the nature of the proposed street furniture.
This is Jeff Bogart, and I'll make that
So-
motion.
So
Please don't ask me
actually
to repeat it.
on the site amenities, if we could go to the next slide. It was this motion that shows
I see.
coordination.
So
with-
that's the
so-
wrong, I'm in the
yes.
wrong pew right now. Okay,
Yes.
so this motion is to approve the landscape with the consideration that they meet with the city arborist just for a final review and coordination.
Just a quick point of order. It should be a recommendation of approval.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Jeff Bogart. I'll make that motion. Allison, do you need me to restate it, or can you get it from the recording?
We're good.
Good.
Okay, is there a second? Someone to second Jeff Bogart's motion?
Yes, I'll second.
I think I heard Keith Brown first. Is there any further question or comment about the landscape from either of these, anyone on this joint committee?
I had one thing that I forgot, and I'm just throwing it out there is I didn't know if there was any coordination for the trees on Superior Avenue. Superior Avenue is one of our main thoroughfares, and I didn't know if there was some sort of bigger vision for Superior Avenue that this fits into.
So I'm sure that Jennifer, when she talks to them, will be able to deal with that.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, please call the question.
Alaski,
Yes.
Benton,
Yes.
Bogart,
Yes.
Boyd,
Yes. Brown,
Yes.
Geist,
Yes.
Long,
Yes.
O'Connell,
Yes.
Sarchik,
Yes.
Soltis,
Yes.
Zarfas.
Yes.
Motion carries. Now we're ready for the site amenities. This is, if someone would like to make a motion to recommend approval of the site amenities with the conditions we spoke about previously.
This is Jeff Bogart, and I'll make that motion to approve the site amenities with the conditions we had set forth previously.
Let's just reiterate those, Jeff.
Okay, so it was coordination with RTA and the city on the transit waiting area in the right of way. That the front garden should have seating elements, or they should review that with staff to hopefully add more seating elements. I believe that was it. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jack?
I think it was not more as opposed to softening the conditions in which they actually occur.
Okay, so softening the conditions in which they occur and to at least review the bench seating in lieu of leaning bars for some of the amenities.
Very good. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Melanie.
Jack, excuse me, I'd like to add that we've approved the concept of the amenities where the public right of way and RTA are concerned, so that the elements seem to be pretty good.
Yes. And Melanie, you're good with that?
Yes.
Very good. Are there any further questions or comments about this amenity recommendation?
Just a quick point of clarification. The seating elements in the garden are not leaning bars, but they are seated elements.
They're seating rails.
Sorry, yes, seating rails. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Keith Brown has his hand raised. But he's muted.
Sorry, can we add in that the consideration of additional seating be added if deemed necessary or a positive element to the garden as a whole in the future, or at least allow for that?
Sure. Are you okay with that, Melanie, as the seconder?
Yes.
And Allison, are you clear on how to deal with that?
Yes.
Very good.
Excuse
Anyone
me,
else?
excuse me, Jack, I just wanted clarity, what was that exactly and how would that?
It's just what you had said that you there was nothing to keep you from in the future adding additional seating elements, and this was just basic encouragement to do that at such time as you deemed it appropriate.
Yep, that would be fine. Thank you.
Anyone else? Alan.
Yeah, just as a question, are we, if we approve this, are we approving the seating rails as opposed to benches
We are.
in terms of amenities? Okay. I guess just as a comment, we've been hearing a lot about Sherwin-Williams comfortability on certain things, and that's not really our concern. Our main focus should be the comfortability of the public and not the multi-billion-dollar company.
Well, I think our concern is balancing the needs and concerns of the company that is important to the city and making a huge investment in it with the comfort of our public as well, encouraging them to be in this place. And it's not an easy question.
It's true, but we can have both. It's not really a one or the other.
I think that's what this is trying to do. Any other questions or comments? And Alan, I appreciate where you're coming from on this. I think you know that all of us have been pushing for more. Hearing none, I will ask you to call the question, Allison.
Malowski,
Yes.
Benton,
Yes.
Bogart,
Yes.
Boyd,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Geist,
Yes.
Long,
Yes.
O'Connell,
No.
Pisarcik,
No.
Soltis,
Yes.
Zarfas.
No.
How is our count, Allison?
The motion is approved.
Very good. I thank everyone for their time and their patience, and I thank the team for their attention to all of this.
And I would just like to say from Sherwin-Williams' behalf, thank you very much. We've had good discussion. It hasn't always been easy, but I feel like we've landed in a good spot, and really excited to start see this thing coming out of the ground, and hopefully we'll have our landscaping in not too long as well. So thank the entire committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Director Hong, is there anything else that we need to discuss before we adjourn?
At this point, I think we're all good. We will make sure to follow up with the Sherwin team regarding Planning Commission tomorrow, the Joint Commission, as well as the follow-ups needed with the city after all of these presentations are done. So thank you all.
Very good. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.